Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Final Score. Today, we're going to be talking all about the NBA's best team, my Brooklyn Nets. We'll be recapping the Blake Griffin signing, talk about what it means, look ahead to what the second half will hold for the Nets, and as always, when we talk Nets, there will be plenty of heated debates. So let's get into it. So to start, we'll start off with the Blake Griffin signing. It was just a few days ago. Blake Griffin agreed to buyout of his contract with the Detroit Pistons, and pretty much as soon as he hit the open market, the general consensus around the league was that he'd be going to Brooklyn. And sure enough, this morning the team announced their official signing of Blake Griffin to a 1-year veteran minimum. So why don't you guys start? What do you think about the Blake signing for the Nets?
I think on a non-super team, it really wouldn't do much because Blake would be drawing, attention from the defenders. But this team is so stacked where you have so many offensive threats with KD, Harden, Kyrie. Then you have players like Joe Harris. It's a nice addition, and it definitely helps push it, but it's not like an over-the-top thing. I think it's just another piece.
Yeah, and it's just another. it's another thing added to the super team, proving that none of them can win finals on their own. Let's just put that out there.
Yeah. Okay, we'll get into all that stuff later. But I agree with Jason that people are kind of talking about this Blake Griffin move as if this was, 2015 Clippers Blake Griffin that was a perennial All-Star.
But he still he's just on the Pistons. It's kind of hard to excel on the Pistons. So
I agree.
I do think that he will get much better on the Nets.
Oh, I agree completely. I think. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say he hasn't dunked in 2 years. It was Jalen Rose who brought out that stat. So he's not gonna have the same explosiveness in the game. He's gonna have some good post scoring and some good scoring ability. But like I said, I just don't think this is an over the top play. I think it's just more noticeable because he's such a big name. But it's a nice piece to add.
I think another thing though, I do think it's not as big as what people are saying, but I do think there's a huge value to it, especially when he's gonna be coming off the bench.
Well, yeah, I don't know exactly what the rotation's going to be yet. They might put him in the starting lineup. They might not.
And if they do, then you got DeAndre Jordan on the bench.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see because they're going to have to – I mean, Claxton's definitely earned more minutes, so it'll be interesting to see the rotation. But, yeah, Blake Griffin, it's a good signing for the Nets. It's not like a major signing. But that being said, as recently as I think it was the 2018-19 season, his first year in Detroit – he averaged 24 points a game and made the All-Star team. We've kind of seen Blake reinvent his game because obviously, like Jay said, he's not the super athletic, high-flying Lob City Clippers Blake Griffin that we're all used to. But he added a three-point shot, and the most valuable part about his game for me in Brooklyn is his ball handling and passing ability. Similar to Bam Adebayo in that aspect. And at this point, his game, obviously he's not as good as Bam, but his game kind of mirrors a Bam Adebayo. So a player like that on a team surrounded by shooters and scorers becomes that much more valuable because it's just one more player that you have to worry about with the ball in their hands.
I still don't think that it's as impactful as a move or as people are making it out to be.
Yeah.
I don't think Blake Griffin is anywhere near the same player he was even 2 years ago.
The thing
but he doesn't need to be.
Yeah,
that is
Blake
true.
Griffin.
What I'm just saying though is, if there's ultimately a difference between, let's just say hypothetically, Nets and Lakers in the finals, Blake Griffin's not the difference.
No, but the defense isn't going to be worried about him, so he is the type of player who can make them pay because he can go out and drop 20 points per game, especially, even at this stage in his career. And the defense isn't going to be focused on him with all the other star power that they have.
Yeah, and also we've seen quite a few occasions where players seem to be washed and at the end of their careers on a bad team, then all of a sudden they go to a contender and they're rejuvenated. I think that's could be what happens with Blake Griffin. I mean, he was on literally the league's worst team, really has no motivation to do much as a vet on such a bad team. I mean, you look at Marc Gasol. He got stuck on the Grizzlies that were bad for a while. Then all of a sudden he goes to Toronto. He looks revitalized. He's a huge part of their NBA Finals win. You look at a guy like Carmelo, who was on the downswing of his career, and even in OKC in Houston, he wasn't as good. Then he had a change of mindset and a change of mentality going to Portland,
Melo
and now
was
he's
better than Brett Griffin ever was, though. I'm just saying that.
Okay.
I'm saying. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
Agreed.
Yeah, definitely. But it shows that there's been times where we've looked at a guy and said he's washed, and then, he goes to a contender, and now all of a sudden he looks a lot better again. And I don't think Blake's ever going to be close to where he was in his prime years. But again, the Nets don't need him to be. But adding a piece like that, whether it's as a starter, maybe it's off the bench, just adds more versatility and makes one of the deepest teams in the league even deeper.
And what Stephen A was saying this morning too on First Take was they were talking about how the bench could be improved and how great of a season Jeff Green has had, and it would be like adding another Jeff Green to the team almost.
Yeah. It'll, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see what Nash does with the rotations, because you have Jeff Green, who's played really well at the 4. You have DeAndre Jordan, who personally I would like to see out of the rotation, but that's never going to happen. So, and then you have Nicholas Claxton, who's played outstanding in a few games and
He deserves
has
more
earned
minutes, yeah.
Right. So, in order for spacing purposes, you don't ever want DeAndre Jordan and Claxton on the floor at the same time. So I don't know. I'm
Jordan
kind of
is such a weird fit in general. But
He
you
is.
can't do anything about it because he's good friends with Kevin Durant.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think what'll happen is you'll see a starting 5 of Kyrie, Harden, Durant, and then one of either Jeff Green or Blake. I'd probably say Jeff because he's the better
I think
shooter.
they should have Jeff in there.
Yeah, and then DeAndre Jordan at the center. And then off the bench, it'll be Harden running the point with Bruce Brown, Joe Harris, Blake, and Claxton. That's the rotation that I would like to see. And I think that rotation is scary.
It's just unreal.
It's disgusting. The NBA is an embarrassment.
I'm kind of surprised Blake Griffin did want to go to Brooklyn.
He wants a chip. At this point in his career, I don't blame Blake Griffin for wanting to go there. Like
Go
that's
to
why
LA.
when
You know what I thought would have? I thought that because the Nets have that disabled player exception that's about $6 million. So I thought that would have been one of the appealing aspects of it, because other contending teams can't offer that. But they didn't even use it on him, which was surprising to me. They used the vet minimum. So, I mean, he wants the chip. Maybe he really wanted to team up with DeAndre Jordan.
I mean,
That's
he gave up
probably not it,
a
but-
lot of money because he gave up $13 million even with his contract with the Pistons.
Yeah.
Then obviously he took that minimum. So
Yeah.
he believes that, as pretty much most people do, NBA fans, that Brooklyn is the place to be right now to win a chip.
So, what do we all think? Is Brooklyn the place to be to win the chip?
I think we can all agree that no matter how we value the Blake Griffin signing, it is just elevates their finals chances just so much. What I mean by
Yeah.
that
If
is
the Nets
that
lose
team
the
is-
finals,
yeah,
it is an embarrassment.
it
and
is.
I don't care if you're going up against LeBron, he's 36 years old. If they lose to the Lakers or to any team, it's an embarrassment.
I don't know that it's an embarrassment.
I think it would
it's
be
a
one of-
disappointment. But I mean, anytime you lose to LeBron James, if the Warriors team lost to LeBron James, no one would be saying that
Because
it
they
was an
didn't have
embarrassment.
Harden, Kyrie, and KD. I'm not
But
saying
they
that.
had 4 All-Stars
They did have. I mean, they
and one
had
of the best teams of all time.
Oh,
Steph
yeah.
Curry's better than Kyrie Irving,
Yeah.
but
and then
I'd say
Kevin
I'm-
Durant is still Kevin Durant.
yeah, I mean, I'm not.
And they had Clay
Clay
and
Thompson.
Draymond
I'd rather have Klay Thompson on any team.
How many
than
times did
James
that
Harden.
team win?
I'd rather
Twice.
have Harden, but Harden's a
Twice.
better player.
They won
Really?
twice,
I'd rather
and they
have-
probably would have won 3
I'd
if
rather
it weren't
have
for
Clay,
Dennis
but
Injury.
Harden's a better player.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Harden's a better player, but if you're asking me for any team that I have,
Oh, 100%,
I'd
give me
take
Clay.
anytime.
100%.
So,
I agree with Shane, honestly. If this team, it's not a matter of chemistry. It is a lot on Steve Nash, too, to be able to coach this team, especially if they lose. That looks terrible for him. So I really do think it's championship or bust.
oh yeah,
100%.
And I
I
still
agree.
think it's
I think it was
big
as soon
bucks.
as they
I
acquired
still
Harden.
think the Lakers are gonna win, and I know this sounds crazy, but you're telling me that some gritty team in the East couldn't maybe give them a run for 7?
Give him a run.
Sixers can beat
You're
them.
telling me the Sixers, the Heat couldn't
No, the
make
Heat
a run?
can't. Oh.
They'll give him a
He
run.
won't.
I don't
Heat,
think.
playoffs Heat or
Unfortunately,
Here's-
talent is going to have to match in this situation.
And also,
somewhat.
the Nets, the two things that will make the Nets Lakers is a different conversation. But if you're specifically looking at teams in the East, the two things that stick out to me on the Nets versus the rest of the competition are shot making down the stretch, which is most valuable in playoffs, and depth, because they have more shot making than any other team in the league by a wide margin. You look at a team like the Sixers, I mean, there's no answer for Embiid, but Embiid can't take on the entire team by himself for a 7-game series.
Agreed.
Now, the Nets can lose games, and they will lose games to some of these teams. But I don't think anybody in the East can go toe for toe with the Nets. In
I
a
think the
7-game series.
Sixers have a good shot because they've got Steph Curry, right? They've got
Yeah.
Steph Curry, Simmons, obviously not a shooter, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid. Those are pretty much your biggest players, and they have other pieces like Matisse.
Also,
But
we don't
it-
know what's going to happen at the deadline.
It's-
We could easily see some teams bulk up.
Yeah, if they got Kyle Lowry or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, and that then it becomes a different conversation. But I mean, right now we have to kind of talk about what the
And
rosters look like right now.
Embiid is different this year. I think Embiid is at the point that we all said, this guy can be one of the most dominant centers we've seen.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about dominance, we think
There are
of
people
Shaq.
saying he's the best player in the league right now. I don't think so, but he's
I mean, he's
playing
averaging,
at that level.
He's averaging 30 and 11.
He
Yeah.
should be the MVP this year.
100%.
As far
100%.
as far as best player,
And
in the
Harden
NBA,
shouldn't-
I
and
would
Harden-
have to disagree.
Oh yeah, no,
but
I don't
yeah.
think so.
And-
But
and
it's
I
a
think
conversation.
It's still LeBron until he
So
loses
can a
a
player
championship.
we see the emotion he puts in the game. I mean, I know people clown the image of, him crying after the game.
Yeah.
But he puts all that emotion into the game. I think the Sixers are going to be a real threat in the East.
Also, it's a
especially with
testament
Doc
to
Rivers.
what everybody's been saying for the past 5 years, which is Brett Brown was horrible.
Yeah.
And keep in mind the roster construction was horrible too. Al Horford and Embiid on the floor together
Yeah.
was never going to work.
Can
It
we
was
also
never
just
going to
quickly
work.
talk about Anthony mentioned previously that James Harden is second, in his opinion, in MVP race right now.
Yeah.
But you're still hanging on to that?
I don't think he
He
won't
wasn't
fit.
an all-star starter.
He won't. I know. Well, he should have definitely been an all-star
Over
starter.
Over who? Over who?
Over
We're
Kyrie
the
and
other
over Brad
major
Beal.
candidates right
But it's LeBron and Embiid's the clear-cut number one.
Yeah,
After
I don't
that,
see
the
how
other
it's not.
candidates, you're looking at Jokic, you're looking at Giannis, you're looking at LeBron, you're looking at Dame, Curry, Harden,
So
Luka.
basically, unless there's a gigantic fall off, it's Embiid's to lose.
Oh yeah, and Harden won't win, and he won't be
He
near the
shouldn't win.
discussion because Durant will come back. But if you're strictly looking at the first half of the season and ranking, James Harden's my number 2.
How? Because let me just tell you one thing. Damian Lillard, with CJ McCollum being out for a while, is
Mhm.
leading the Blazers in the West, and they're 20-14, and I think they're the 5 seed. With no help almost, and he's averaging 30 or 25 or something like that.
Dame's having an incredible season. When you take a deep dive into the numbers and you look at efficiency, you look at all around production, it's important. And Harden's numbers, he's a couple points down in points per game, but he leads the league in assists. He's averaging 8 rebounds. He's doing
You know,
it on
I think
incredible
I
efficiency,
think I can.
and he's doing it on the team that has been. I mean, they're dominating.
I think I could lead the league in assists with KD, Kyrie, and Joe Harris as my teammates. It's pretty easy to get assists when you have 4 stars around you. It's not hard. Nobody else has that type of power to pass to.
I mean, I would take Jokic over Harden right now as far as MVP. He's averaging 27, 11, and 8.6. I mean, just me personally, I think I would take Jokic over
This is
Harden for MVP to be.
I took I broke down all of the candidates and looked deep into their numbers, standings, all that stuff. My final ranking that I came up with was Embiid number 1, Harden number 2, Jokic number 3, Braun number 4, Dame 5, Curry 6, Giannis 7, and Luka 8. That was how I ranked them.
I'd
And
take Braun and Jokic over Harden.
I almost even take Dame over him just because.
the reason
I don't think Harden is that outlandish at 2. However, there's no way, even if there was a steep fall off by Embiid, that he'd actually get it.
oh no, he won't. This is Embiid's to lose.
And I'm saying even if he falls off, they're not giving it to him.
no, Harden won't get it. No.
Yeah.
But if you're
Yeah, he
looking
won't
at
deserve it
statistically
either.
who's having the best
It would
season,
be most likely Dame or Jokic.
yeah. And the reason also, you guys, the reason I dropped Braun a little bit is because, one, the slide that they went on when Davis fell out of the lineup. And
But
two,
that was just because it was the first.
their record against the top teams in the league is pretty bad. And
Wait,
that
just so you know-
that to me
Now,
is
Harden's
hurts
not
his MVP case.
the reason they're winning. I mean, against
Yeah.
all those
That's
500 teams. Like if you take Harden out, you have Kyrie, KD, and Joe Harris on the floor, and all those
KD's
guys.
missed most of the season. Kyrie's been in and out of the
I just
lineup.
wanna say-
Without Harden, the Nets are probably around 500 right now. This
That's
comes
a
from a
lot.
Nets fan who's watched every single game this season. I am telling you, without Harden, we'd be a 5, maybe a game or 2 above. But with the amount of time Kyrie's missed, the amount of time KD's missed, top to bottom of the roster, they've had injuries like
yeah,
crazy.
but KD's also missing games because of load management.
He hasn't missed a game because of load management. He
They
missed
rested
two.
him.
He
They
missed
rested
about,
him.
He missed 2 or 3 early in the season.
No,
But he's been out with an injury,
yeah,
and
but
he
they
was
also
out with
rested him
contact
a few
tracing.
times.
And
Contact tracing
they
was-
were able to
yeah,
rest him
definitely.
because of having Harden, and
That's my point.
they were able to stay afloat because of it. I'm just saying,
Another thing
since
about
the
LeBron,
Nets,
though, you're saying that how big of a slide they have when AD. First of all, AD's missed like 6 games or 8 games, and the only reason they lost 4 in a row is because their schedule was impossible, and it was their first few games without AD. Once they got into the rotation once they got used to the rotation without AD, they won 4 in a row,
no, I know
beating
that,
the
but
Warriors, the Blazers, and some other teams.
Yeah.
So I don't.
season long, the Lakers' record against the best teams in the league hurts LeBron's MVP
Because
case
they're
for me.
coasting.
Okay, but how does even if they're coasting, how does that
I'm just saying.
make LeBron an MVP
If you're talking
candidate?
about, so if you want to talk about their best teams, then you also need to talk about value. And Harden is not even close to the most valuable player on the Nets, or maybe on the Nets. But if
But-
you take away, if
okay,
you
but-
take Harden, if you take
So this is
should-
always the conversation though. What does MVP mean? Because should it be who is the most valuable to their team? Yeah, LeBron's going to win that almost every year. But it's not. The way that MVP goes is who's having the statistical best season. And when you break down all the statistics,
so then who you're
I
playing
take
shouldn't
Harden
matter
at number 2.
because it's just statistically. So that's an invalid argument.
Okay, but it also is based on team production too. It's not who's most valuable to their team, but it's who's having the best season and doing the most for their team, if that makes sense. But
So then,
but we don't need to spend too much time on the MVP debate.
This isn't
We have
the
a lot more to
MVP
cover.
debate
This
podcast.
isn't the MVP podcast. So let's see. We were talking about the Eastern Conference. We were talking about the Sixers.
I
the
think
Heat.
a point we should talk about, unless you guys wanted to continue that Sixers conversation, is the topic that KD can't win on his own. And because, I mean, I know me and Jaden have been talking a lot about it. You think, he didn't win in OKC, so he went to statistically what was one of the greatest teams of all time.
that also just beat them in the playoffs.
I'm not going to argue
Yeah.
that, and I also don't really care because nobody in the history of the NBA can win on their own.
I'm not talking about. Okay, when I mean, okay,
We're not
fine.
talking about on their own.
You mean
Everyone
he
needs
can't
their
even
guy.
he can't even win with his guy? He had Russell Westbrook. You're telling me he was on his own?
No, but
And
he
James
had to
Harden
face
on the bench.
LeBron in the finals. I
when
mean,
we say on our own, it's
he
like
had to face
it's,
the
it's just
Miami
like a figure
Miami
of
Heat
speech.
Big Three,
On
which
our
is
own
one of the
is
best
you,
teams of
your
all time.
guy.
I'd
Like
even
two
talk.
stars.
I'd even talk about.
Superstars.
I'd even talk about when LeBron was on the Cavs. He was on his own. Obviously, he had his guy, but I'd say that's the closest it's been on his own. Kevin Durant cannot win unless he has 2 high-level All-Stars on his team
I'm not gonna
because
argue
he's a
that.
pansy and he can't lead a team. And he's a soft cupcake.
Because you think, he goes to Brooklyn with Kyrie. And I think a lot of people, including me at
I
the
just like
beginning
to say
of
one
last year,
second, Katie, if you'd like to hop on the podcast, you're very welcome to.
If we look at KD last year, and me personally, I'm not a KD fan at all, especially after that OKC move. But for him to sign in Brooklyn with Kyrie, a team that was only an 8 seed, I was like, okay, let's see if he can do it. So it's just really annoying as an NBA fan to see him force Harden there, to see all these
Okay, but-
plays. It's just a testament to that he
Okay.
can't win on his own, and you could almost argue that he knows it with him forcing these guys here.
But why not? The
Because-
way the league is trending.
Just
Nobody-
that's
Anthony-
not
You
the
build- you
narrative.
build
No
your
one
super
does
team.
that.
Take
Like
away
KD.
Kevin Durant. Nobody else has had any super team like Kevin Durant has. Take away that, then the second best super team is who?
Probably Miami.
Okay, but they still. Yeah, but
I'm
they,
not comparing it. I'm not saying Kevin Durant can win on his own, but also I really don't care about that discussion because I don't need him to win on his own. Do I think the Nets still would have been
But
a
I think
finals
it's
contender
important to
without
talk
Harden?
about because it's
No.
just a testament to KD's
They
legacy.
would've.
His legacy is tainted. Even if they win this, it's another ring for him. But with Kyrie Harden,
Yeah.
put any other superstar.
if they
on the
let
team,
me
they'd
just, I
probably
just want
win.
to say
That's fine,
I
but-
just want to say talking about legacies. If they lose this finals,
Yeah.
Kyrie Irving,
This isn't the legacy pod.
Kyrie Irving will know that you can't win without LeBron. James Harden will be a certified loser. He is just a loser when it comes to basketball. Like he's just not a winner
He's not wrong.
He's not a winner.
Yeah.
at all, and he's a loser. And Kevin Durant
By
is
the way,
an
James,
actual.
I'm
I'm
Love
not,
your game.
I'm not
Love your
saying
game.
James Harden is a winner, but one thing we have to account for James Harden, every single time in the playoffs, he ran into the best team of all time,
I'm sorry,
the
Anthony.
Warriors.
I don't know if we can have this conversation with you.
Bro,
Because you're a
I'm not saying.
certified
I'm not
fraud
saying.
hater.
I will
Listen,
say truthfully,
I'm not saying Harden's a winner.
There's a couple things. James Harden also faced the Warriors that only had about 1 or 2 stars at the same time. That Kawhi Leonard took down.
Let's just
When
wait. What?
That team that Kawhi
Kevin
Leonard,
Durant was still in that series, though.
Yeah, but they didn't have Curry, and I don't think they had Clay.
Yeah, what series? What are we talking about?
In the
Sorry,
Rocket
now.
series?
Yeah.
Yes,
Wait,
they
what?
did.
No, they.
Clay went down towards the end of the Rocket series, but Durant when. Wait, no.
Durant was injured, then came back, then got injured.
Yeah.
I want to just think about this. If the Brooklyn
That
Nets,
was also the Harden and Russ Rockets, and
What I'll say basically is I do believe the biggest thing going against the Nets, no matter how many players you have on a team, LeBron is a winner. Everybody on that Nets team is, I'm not saying they're losers when it comes to the playoffs. They choke consistently.
maybe not Kyrie. But
well, Kyrie choked in 2 games in when he was in Boston, and we count that as his playoff career, where he has a history of. And the difference is, Kyrie now is much more like Cavs Kyrie than Celtics Kyrie, or at least what we need of him, because we don't need him to lead the team. That's what we have Kevin Durant for, and Kevin Durant. I mean, there's enough on this team that none of these guys need to carry the load.
But here's the point I'm
And there's-
interested in. Kyrie Irving, James Harden, Kevin Durant, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, Spencer Dinwiddie if he comes back healthy.
I think he will.
And then you have Joe Harris, Jeff Green, Nicholas Claxton.
Bruce
If
Brown.
this team, Bruce Brown, you can keep adding, because if this team loses the NBA Finals, it might go down as one of the biggest flops in NBA history.
Also, you were
It
talking.
has to.
I know that
It has to.
they have ran into some great teams. Obviously, in 2015 they played the Warriors, but before that, in 2013 they lost to the Thunder. This is hard, and then 2014 they lost to Portland, and they also lost to the Spurs a few years later. So it's not the only
Who
reason.
else was on those Rockets
I-
teams?
The only reason I'm just saying, who else was on that Blazers team with Damian Lillard?
LaMarcus Aldridge was another He was an All-Star at the time.
Okay,
He-
still, I'm
he
just
was the
saying.
best
I'm
player
just
on the
saying.
team.
You cannot make the excuse that the only reason Harden hasn't won is because of the Golden State.
Okay, regardless.
Because that's crap, and you know it.
But you can't. But listen, you can't compare Harden on the Rockets to Harden on the Nets. One, he's playing 2 completely different roles. Harden was never going to win.
Once a loser, always a
Harden
loser.
was never going to win when he has to carry the entire team. He's not that type of player. But we don't need him to be that type of player. We have one of the deepest rosters in the NBA. You have 3 elite players. You don't need any one of them to be, the alpha dog for an entire series. And that's the crazy thing about the Nets. Look at the Nets. I mean, right now, I know that postseason is a different discussion, right? And regular season only means so much. But the Nets, KD, Kyrie, and Harden have played 7 games together. Kyrie missed about, how many games did he miss when he left? Like 5 or 6 games early in the
I think
season.
it was 7.
You have a group of players. The only players that were on this roster last year were Joe Harris and DeAndre Jordan. They're the only ones getting consistent minutes. And Claxton, but he didn't play much
No,
because
like
he
I
was
said,
a
I
rookie.
mean, like you could keep adding players because there's so many players that are impactful on this team.
But my point to that is that, you have an entire group of new players learning to play together. You have a new head coach. Despite all of this, they're half a game out of first in the Eastern Conference, and they're beating consistently all of the good teams. They haven't lost.
Did you just say, despite all of this, they have 2 MVPs on their team and a All-Star starter?
Right, but
Despite all of
they've
this.
they've had plenty of odds against they've had plenty of odds against them. And I know that having 3 superstars is. But guys,
What
It'll
odds
help you
do-
out. 3 superstars.
no. But what I'm saying is the amount of
Over.
injuries they faced, learning to
Oh.
play with new players under a new coach. There's enough there
But injuries.
that could have been very, very rocky, and yet the Nets are destroying all the best teams in the league, and that's without Kevin Durant.
Because even without them, they still have an MVP and a high-level
Exactly,
All-Star.
that's the point. Is that they're playing playing at a
think
higher
we're-
level.
Anthony, nobody's saying that they're not going to win the finals. We're saying if they don't, they're a flop.
Oh well,
And
yeah, duh. I mean, that's obvious.
But I'm just saying that I wouldn't say, oh, they have everything against them. Every team's gone through injuries. The Lakers don't have 14 All-Stars on their team like the Nets do. And Anthony Davis just lost. They lost. Dude,
They're 4-4 since losing Anthony Davis. But what I'm saying is that,
that's my
for
point.
the Nets to come in,
Every team goes
that's
through
not
injury.
even mentioning
So for
that
the
Kevin
Nets,
Durant is coming off of one of the worst injuries in sports and an Achilles tear. And you have a
Okay, but he
32-year-old
overcame it,
guy
so it's
coming
not-
off an Achilles
Yeah,
tear.
well, LeBron's
But
36.
what I'm saying is that there's plenty there that could have made this a rocky first half of the season. But the Nets are playing this well, and they're not even at
I don't
their
know if
highest
that's a
yet.
great storyline. I know they're not at their highest yet, but we can't really talk about the Nets came over so much adversity because Kyrie left on his own to miss 7 games. I mean, I
But
don't
that's
really.
that's adversity for the team.
But like,
Whether
why,
or not-
why
it
is there
doesn't
so much
matter.
to
It
overcome?
doesn't
There's
matter
such
who's
a
inflicted
talented
it.
roster. When I think you're that talented, there's only so much to overcome.
And it's
Because
not.
we keep talking about their talent.
And you're talking about they had so much to overcome. There's not a single team in the NBA that doesn't have injuries or stuff to overcome. Especially now with COVID, like they've had to overcome stuff
Guys,
like that.
my only point about what they've had to overcome is that if they were losing games against, let's say, the Lakers, the Sixers here and there, it would be pretty easy to excuse it as they're still gelling, they're still getting together. Like that is a very
they played
valid
the Lakers
reason.
without Anthony Davis.
But
And they won by 11.
that's just one game. They beat the Clippers twice, once without Harden. They beat the Jazz. I mean, without KD. They've beaten the Jazz. They've beaten.
Knicks
They
beat
beat
the Jazz.
Philly. They've beaten all of the best teams in the league. The Knicks are 5-10 against teams over 500. Don't start that conversation. But the Nets have
Yeah.
not lost to one
Yeah, the
good
Knicks
team
are
this
led by
season.
Julius Randle.
And the Nets are led by thinking a bunch of
But you said the Knicks beat the Jazz.
Yeah, we did.
They're also by the way, they're also 2 games. I think what's the Nets record?
They're 24-13, I think.
Okay, so they're
24-13.
I think 2 games above the Blazers. Let that sink in.
But why are we
Who's
comparing
overcome
the Blazers?
I'm
to
just
this?
saying because you're talking about adversity. They don't have CJ McCollum
I
and
wasn't
Damian
talking.
Lillard.
I'm not talking about adversity right now. I'm talking about how but we moved on from that. I'm talking about how the Nets have consistently beaten all the best teams in the league at half strength. So
Half
that
strength for the biggest super team of all time.
that's exactly the point, though. That's why the league should be so scared. Is that they're beating everybody when they're not at full strength.
I
So
think
when
we
they
all-
are at full strength,
the whole league is scared because you have a bunch of losers going up and teaming up because they can't win on their own. So yeah, they're like, oh dang, this sucks. I beat these guys when they were on their own. Now they have to team up to beat
That's
me.
the point I'm focused on. Is just there's a whole consensus that the Nets are going to win the finals. The Nets should win the finals.
I think the Lakers will win.
But that's the majority consensus in the NBA is that the Nets are going to win. And I think that's just, for me, what I'm focused on is if they lose, how terrible it is going to look. Like Jaden said, whether your opinion of James Harden is good or bad, he's going to have proven himself to not win, to be a loser in the moment that it matters, to Kyrie to not be able to win without LeBron, and Katie that he cannot lead a team.
I don't think that's that big of a talking point, though, because I'm
It
not
is, 'cause
arguing that.
But I'm just saying, for me personally, that's what I'm focusing on. If this team loses, it is going to look so terrible for the Nets.
And I just want
Especially
to
for
say,
Steve Nash.
Yes,
every single finals is well deserved, and every single finals is very important. Like it's commendable. But if the Nets win, it's not gonna be like a great story. Like if the Nets win, people will be like, okay, yeah, they should have won. You know what I mean? There's everything to lose for the Nets, and there's not that much to win.
You could make the same exact statement about the Warriors, though, when they were a super team, and they still had the story of.
Yeah, but that's a little bit different because they also had the best record of all time, so that was the story.
So if anything, that's even worse because KD joined a team with the best record of all time.
Okay,
I'm confused by the argument that
yeah,
we're
but
having.
and then
Nobody
KD goes
said
and does it
KD's
again.
a saint.
Yeah.
I'm not saying KD's a saint. I will never defend KD going to the Warriors.
But so how is it? So do you think? So you're gonna defend him when it comes to going to the Nets because that was the same exact move.
It wasn't even remotely close to the same exact move, bro. KD going to an 8th seed that had a good foundational core with Kyrie Irving, and then yes, later on they bring
But
in
why
James
did
Harden.
he go? Why did he
But
go?
it's still
why did he go
even
to the Nets
with the
to
three
build
of them,
a super team? He didn't go to the Nets to be like, okay, I'm gonna go on my own. He went to the Nets to go build another super team.
I think we're
Okay.
kind of having a couple different conversations
Yeah.
because Anthony's talking about the talent and how that's just going to win out and how we all believe that is.
Yeah.
And I think
The fact
we're
of-
kind of talking about the character of the players and how much they have to live up to and how they have so much to lose.
their expectation is as high as any other team outside of Golden State.
As it should be.
The
Yeah, as it
only,
should be.
the only, yeah, as it should be. The only team with higher expectations, I think, maybe ever, outside of maybe a Bulls team that had won 5 times in 6 years.
Yeah.
But the only other team with higher expectation was the Golden State Warriors when Kevin Durant joined the best team record-wise of all time. That was the only team that ever had higher expectations. And the Nets have high expectations, and with those high expectations, when you have this amount of stars and the depth and talent that they have, yeah, of course, if you lose, it's going to be a big loss. It'll hurt all of their legacies. I'm not saying it won't. But
And I
that's less of a. I don't know.
I just don't think
personally I don't care about that as a Nets fan.
Well, yeah, I mean, as a fan of the team, you're just gonna want the chip. I just don't even think the win is that impressive.
Yeah.
Like the Nets won. Yeah, I'm sure any team with KD, Harden, and Kyrie would win.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you're still a Nets fan. No, I'm kidding. But
I just think we're kind of just having a lot of different conversations because we all believe the Nets are going to win, and I think
Except for
that's
Dylan.
Dylan thinks the Lakers.
yeah. Because as a Knicks fan, I mean, I would just be focusing
wait,
on the Knicks winning.
let's-
It's just two different.
Let's talk on this real quick, Dill. What separates the Lakers?
Yeah.
Is it just as simple as LeBron?
I think I still believe that playoff basketball is entirely different from regular season basketball. And like I've said, I don't think Kevin Durant. You can say what you want about Kyrie, but he's not enough. As a contributing factor, he could be, but I don't think Kevin Durant and James Harden are winners in the playoffs. And I think LeBron, and they're already a better team than last year. They're a better team than last year. They're It's not an hour and 30. It says an hour on.
Okay,
it's
that's
like
what
30
Jaden
minutes.
said. 30 minutes?
But I think yes.
Okay.
LeBron. The Lakers were dominant last year, and they're a better team this year. I know regular season there's been some ups and downs, but
I just
matter
wanna
of
see
fact,
LeBron.
they're going to be a better team in the playoffs,
Absolutely.
and I think that they will still beat the Nets. Maybe
Even-
in 7,
even
but
with-
I think it'll happen. I think LeBron has one more in him, and this is the one more he has.
as a Nets fan,
I think one more, like, this will be an incredible one for him to win.
Even
Last
at-
year wasn't too difficult for him. This year,
Ooh, I kind of disagree with the circumstances. I mean, maybe not against going up against the Heat, but the circumstances.
the fact of
LeBron
winning
came out and said that was the hardest.
He said that
time
was the
he ever
hardest.
had to win.
Yeah. But
I think this year will be his hardest.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think he can do it. And it will
Okay,
cement
so-
his
That might
le-
put it
if he cares
over
that
the
much
top.
about his legacy, I think he will work.
I will say, as
It's also another
Yes,
testament to
probably.
if he's going to be the GOAT this year.
oh yeah,
could
he needs to win it.
very much.
It could put him over the top.
Yeah.
So
It
I
could.
think-
So, but
so
listen,
it's-
even as the most, I've been trying to say this for 10 minutes. Even as the most optimistic Nets fan that you'll find, I am worried about the Lakers, and I could very well be convinced that the Lakers would win in a series. But I will take the Nets. And to your point on playoff basketball is different. Playoff basketball is primed on hitting shots in the biggest moments, and Kevin Durant has done that. And you look at that finals with the Warriors, and I know it was the Warriors, but who did they give the ball to every time they needed a clutch bucket? It was
two
Kevin
times
Durant.
They were in a close game.
What? They had multiple close games in the
Also,
series.
I do think the Lakers will probably make another move. Before
Oh,
they
yeah,
go.
sure.
They're also really. They're
Pick
also.
up
I think they're.
some
But we
guy.
can't-
I think they're signing Drummond.
It's tough to speak on future moves. I mean, we're talking as things
There's a
are
heavy
right now.
rumor for-
I'm just
Drummond,
saying. I think it's very safe to say that since it's a LeBron team, they will add some.
Drummond's not going to help them at all.
I mean, who are some guys on the block right now? Like Jeremy Grant, some other.
If they're
Jeremy
gonna go
Grant,
like Jimmy Grant, that'd
Oladipo.
be huge.
I could easily
Warriors
see
are
a guy
looking
like
at
Grant
Depot.
or Oladipo. going to
Oh
the
yeah, I
Lakers.
could too. And then when that happens, that
Although I
broadens
prefer
the
Grant to
discussion.
go to the Celtics, but
Yeah, but the one thing is another aspect that's going to hurt the Lakers and really any team, in my opinion, against the Nets in a 7-game series is what happens when LeBron comes off the floor. You can stagger LeBron and AD.
he plays
But-
like 45 minutes in the playoffs.
Yeah, he does.
Yes, he does, and I think that could catch up to him when you're facing. I mean, the Nets
It
second,
hasn't in
the
the
Nets
past 17
bench,
years.
the Nets bench is gonna. That's not true. The Nets bench is gonna be run.
I
by
don't think it will
James
this
Harden.
year. I think, like I said, I don't think it will this year. I don't think that's a problem. This
It's
year.
it's never
But-
happened to him.
okay,
It's
so
never really caught up to him.
A lot of, I mean, when you look at NBA Finals, a lot of times, what's obviously the stars are the most important, but what's also important is the surrounding pieces. It's rare that you'll find an NBA Finals team that doesn't have surrounding pieces contributing. Even look at the Warriors team, right? You look at their big three, of course: Steph, Clay, KD. They have Draymond there. They have Andre Iguodala. They had Sean Livingston was a huge part of their team. Like up and down, their depth was one of the things that made them so tough. Is because they keep coming at you all game. Now the Nets have James Harden will be running the bench with one of the league's best shooters, Joe Harris. Bruce Brown's been a great piece, but now you have Blake Griffin on that bench. You have, a pick and roll guy, Claxton. But I mean, this
All
team is
this
deep.
To be a 36-year-old.
Yeah, I won't argue that. I mean, it's a testament to LeBron's greatness that this is what you need to beat him. And as a LeBron fan, it's tough because I've always wanted to see LeBron as the GOAT, and he's always had to face some of the hardest teams in the league.
I
so.
don't think, I've definitely come to love LeBron. Like, I'm going to be rooting so incredibly hard for LeBron in this finals. And I think I'm interested to see the Nets, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but how they develop, if they'll turn into kind of like the villain of the NBA.
I think they already are.
Yeah, I think
As
they
soon
are.
as Harden was there, in my
This is
opinion, they were the
coming
villain of
from
the
a Celtics
NBA.
fan. The fact that I'm considering rooting for the Lakers.
If I was a
over
Celtics fan, I would be.
the fact that I'm considering rooting for the Lakers over the Nets tells me the Nets are the villains right now in the NBA.
I mean,
Absolutely.
if LeBron does this, because, I mean, we've talked a lot about the Nets, obviously, and if LeBron does this, it almost, for me at least, I think it would almost cement him as the GOAT. If
I
he
agree.
beats the greatest offensive trio of all time, one of the greatest super teams of all time,
He's
It
the
has
GOAT.
to.
Now
in
that's
my
something I
opinion.
can get behind.
I agree with that. No arguments here. So one thing I want to
What?
touch on.
If LeBron beats this Nets team, is he the GOAT, in your opinion?
There's a chance of it, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd have to really think.
I
that
think
it really
at
could
36
be, yeah,
against this Nets team,
And he's
he
not
is the
dumb.
GOAT. No.
No,
So-
he isn't.
And I mean, there's plenty you could argue all day. The bottom line is either way, you'd get a great series out of Nets and Lakers. And I think the Nets would win out. You think the Lakers would win out.
But I also
To
say
me-
I think that the Sixers could beat them. That's just
Yeah, the question, I think, obviously I do believe the Nets are going to come out of the East, but I think it's a conversation to have and a worry for the Nets that the Sixers are a team that could definitely beat
And
them
here's
with
the
the
thing.
season and beats happening.
I'm a huge LeBron fan, so I almost want the Nets to get there just because it would mean more if he could beat the Nets than if he could beat the Sixers. So
Yeah.
I want to see Lakers Nets, and I want to see the Nets suffer.
What I do want to touch on before we close this out is what I've been saying all day is Sean Marks does not get enough appreciation as the general manager of this team for what he did. And everyone talks about, the Nets 3 stars, and that's amazing. But even being in a position to have 3 superstars. When Sean Marks took over the team, it was shortly after the Paul Pierce trade ravaged the Nets. They didn't have their own first-round pick for years. They had no cap space, nothing. They were
Yeah,
the
who was their
last.
GM before that?
Billy King.
He sucked.
Yeah, he's terrible.
He's terrible.
He was Billy King. I will always hate Billy King, but it was one of the worst positions in all of sports to take that job at that time. And what he did to turn it around, build the culture that they built, and make it an attractive free agent destination to bring in Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, then trade their depth to have James Harden, and oh, by the way, still have one of the league's best benches after that. It's incredible. So, I mean, Sean Marks just deserves, win or lose, Marks deserves all the credit in the world for even putting this team in that conversation. Because a few years ago, if I told you the Nets would have 3 superstars, you would think I was insane. So, just props to my man.
Yeah, Sean Marks is definitely one of the better GMs in the league. I definitely agree with that, for sure. So that should just about wrap it up unless there's anything else you guys wanted to touch on.
Not really. Do you think outside? I mean, Philly's the obvious threat to Brooklyn. Do you think in the East there's any other team? Because I don't think any other team would stand a shot in a 7-game series.
I'd like to say the Celtics, but unless they got another piece, there's no way.
I'd love to
Yeah.
see the Battle of New York.
Maybe you will in the first round.
Can you imagine?
I want to see them in the first
That would
round.
be-
The
that would be
Knicks will be a
great.
4 seed unless the Nets drop down to a 5 seed. Unless the Nets
Just
drop down to a 4
imagine,
seed.
this is
I don't see it there.
There's obviously no % chance of this happening, but imagine if the Knicks beat the Nets in a series. I think New York
that would be ballistic. But
New York.
I
would
think
go
regardless,
insane.
like in all seriousness, a Knicks Nets series would be so good for basketball in general. To have New York against New York in the playoffs,
I think Knicks could.
the
win
ratings
any
of that would be through the roof. That would be one of the higher rated first round series you'd ever see, I think.
It definitely would be, especially because these teams. I think I saw something where it was a couple years ago. Some of the bottom teams in the league, like the Sixers, the Knicks, the Nets, and the Bucks. They're like the bottom 4 teams,
Mhm.
and at one point this year, those were the top 4 teams in the East.
It has been an incredible season, and there's a whole lot more to come. and we all have our varying opinions on the Nets as always. Do you guys have anything else, or is that going to wrap it up?
No, it should be. Wraps it up for me.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for listening, and we'll be back soon. This has been
The final score.